Hi, this is Kelly from paperbeadrollers.com, and today's tutorial is short but has some interesting tidbits for you. Number one, we're going to be using a handmade paper. It's absolutely gorgeous, but it reacts a little bit differently with some of our elements. Number two, we're going to be doing your traditional barrel bead in a non-traditional way. We're going to do a hollow barrel bead so that we can insert some metal spacers right inside the bead for a really cool look. So I hope you enjoy this tutorial. Let's get started. The tools and supplies you need for this project are the peach-sized bead roller from paperbeadrollers.com, a sharp pair of scissors, now these are also from paperbeadrollers.com, and you'll need a flat and a round paintbrush. You'll also need something to measure very tiny amounts. I'm using my digital caliper tool, which you can get on my website as well. You'll need whatever agent you use to harden and seal your beads. I'm using Diamond Glaze. For glue, I'm using Aleene's Tacky Glue, and depending on how you're going to place your spacers on your beads, you may want to have some E6000 on hand. I'm using these pretty gold spacer discs with my paper beads. They are 8 millimeters in size, and you can purchase packs of them on my website at paperbeadrollers.com. And by the way, I decided to buy these for the shop specifically to use with this paper. I have been waiting on this project for a while now. This paper is absolutely divine. It is handcrafted in India from recycled cotton rags. Now this paper is white when they first make it. They dye it after the fact. You can see that it's red all the way through, which makes it perfect for paper beads. Now once the paper's dyed, they then silkscreen each individual piece in gold paint one at a time. Now you might recognize this symbol. It's the symbol for Om, which is used in meditation and prayer. I will put a link in the video description to where you can purchase this. This is sold by Regina, who is a friend of mine here in North Carolina. In order to make the most of this handmade paper, we're going to make the core of the beads from 65-pound cardstock in a similar red. Now you can use whatever thickness of paper you'd like. You'll just wrap the paper enough times to make the final bead the desired size. I want my beads to end up being 8 millimeters in diameter to match my gold discs that will be affixed to the edges. After a bit of trial and error, I found that a core strip of about 1 3/4 inches, along with one wrap of the handmade paper, worked perfectly to make my 8 millimeter beads. Now I use several widths of paper, but the ones I'm working with here are a 1/2 inch wide. I'm going to make two different styles of beads. One where the discs will be glued to the outside edge of the beads, and one where we will inset the disc into the core of the bead and it will be flush with the edge. We'll start with the bead that will have the discs affixed to the outside edge. Because I cut the handmade paper with scissors, it's not exactly a perfect 1/2 inch width. I need to hold it up to the core paper strip and cut the strips so that the widths match exactly. Now that is very important with this bead, or you'll have uneven edges and your discs or whatever you're putting on the outside of the bead will not sit straight. Now I'm going to roll. I'll roll the core piece first. I want this to be as tight and as straight as possible. It's very important that the edges are lined up exactly. Now I can put the decorative paper on the outside. Liberally cover the core with glue. Make sure you get the edges so there'll be a nice tight seal. Now I always start with the side furthest from my Om symbol. Place it perfectly centered on the core and let it sit for just a second or so, and the glue will kind of form up a bit. This will help keep it from slipping as you roll. Now I'm going to curve the paper around. Add a bit more glue on this edge and press it down. Now, I do need to hold it for a minute because this handmade paper sucks water like a sieve. That is why I'm using the thicker tacky glue. If you put white school glue on this, it will disappear into the paper in a flat second and it won't hold anything shut. Once the paper is secure, you can pull the bead off the roller and let it dry thoroughly before glazing. For our inset bead, we need to trim down the core strip. The core is going to create a small shelf for the disc to sit on. If there's no paper shelf for the disc to sit on inside the bead, it won't be stable enough to last as jewelry. That means our core strip has to be just the right amount smaller than our decorative strip in order for the disc to be flush with the edge of the bead. So let's measure the disc and see how much space it needs. I'll grab my digital caliper and I'm going to pinch the disc here. Okay, it's about 2.1 millimeters wide, and we're going to have a disc on each side, so we need double that measurement. That means we need our core strip to be 4.2 millimeters shorter than our decorative strip. Now you can get very exacting about the math with this if you want. I'm just going to eyeball it. I'm going to trim a bit from this strip. Now I'll roll the core strip just like before. Tack it down. Okay, and I'm going to cover it with glue. This is all the same as what we just did, but here's the different part. When I put the decorative piece on, I have to make sure it's perfectly centered because I need to leave the equal space on either side for the gold discs. So I'm going to carefully wrap it around the core, and I'm going to be careful not to press down near the edges too much because I don't want to bend that decorative cover over the spot where there's no core or paper. I'm pulling it as tight as I can. I don't want there to be any little gaps between the layers. And I'm going to tack down the end. Now again, because it's handmade paper, I need to hold it in place for a minute until the tacky glue sets up. And there we go. See the little shelf in there? Okay, it's time to glaze. Everyone seems to have their own setup for glazing. When I use these larger rollers like the peach or the pink sizes, I pull out this huge skewer. This was sold in a pack meant for roasting marshmallows. So I'm going to run the bead around the skewer a little bit, making sure that that little flap of paper that was in the slot of the bead roller is flush against the inside of the bead. I'm also going to make sure that my bead is shaped as perfectly round as I can get it. Now remember that the handmade paper sucks up water, so we're going to do several very thin coats of diamond glaze. We are going for a smooth, glassy surface, but we're not going to get that on the first coat. The paper is kind of bumpy, and we're going to see that reflected in the glaze at first. Do not give in to the temptation to put a thick coat on. Keep it light and thin, just enough to cover the surface well. Let it dry completely, maybe even a little longer than you think it needs, and then do a second and third coat. Now you can see here as I'm doing the second coat, now it's starting to become nice and smooth, and then that third coat is really going to give you the nice glossy finish. You can do more than that if you want, but I found 3 coats worked. Now that the outside of your bead has all of its coats and it's thoroughly dry, it's time to do the inside. I'm going to hold the bead with my fingers, and that's why you need to make sure it is 100% completely dry on the outside because you don't want any fingerprints on this bead. And then I'm going to use my round brush to cover the inside with glaze. Now, if you make the coat of glaze too thick and you leave the bead standing up on its end, you're going to get some drips down and it's going to fill in the end of the bead. So make sure you put the bead on a surface where you can peel it up if you need to. Vinyl works, or maybe a layer wax paper would work as well. And then you can just break through the diamond glaze when you're done. Now, I did 2 coats on the inside of each bead, and that made them hard enough to withstand the wear and tear that they'll have as jewelry. Now, I'm pressing on this bead as hard as I can squeeze, and while I can make it bend slightly, once the discs are put in place, I shouldn't even be able to do that. So I think we're good to go with 3 coats on the outside and 2 on the inside. Here's the bead with the inset disc. I'm going to line the inside edge of the bead with tacky glue, just kind of getting it all over. I'm going to gently place the disc in place and push it down to where it's sitting on that edge of the core paper. If you sized your strips right, it should be flush with the edge of the bead. You might want to use a toothpick or something to make sure it's positioned exactly right before it dries. Now, it's important to let the diamond glaze dry completely before you attempt this. If the bead isn't hard enough, or if your glaze isn't dry enough, it will bow out as you put the gold edge in. I had that happen to the first bead I tried, and so I had to leave them sit overnight before I went ahead and put the discs in. Now, once the disc is in place, you can just roll it in your fingers to seal the paper to the disc. Let it dry completely before using it to create a project. Now we're going to glue the disc straight to the edge of the bead. Now, you might want to use the E6000 for this, as it's a stronger glue. When you're using E6000, a couple of things you need to know. Number 1, never squeeze the tube. Use a toothpick, stick the toothpick into the tube to get the glue out. If you do need to squeeze it, just a very tiny bit, because this metal tube does not let out again. And so you're going to get way more glue than you think you're going to get for that little squeeze, okay? It's like the never-ending stream of glue. Also, make sure you wipe off your tip very well before you put your cap back on. And also, you may want to get some chapstick or some Vaseline or something and put it at the end of the tube so you don't accidentally glue the tip onto the E6000. Okay, so we're going to cover the edge of this bead with glue, and we're going to place the disc right where we want it, lined up in the center. And I'm going to leave it to dry completely before I make anything with this bead. So here you are, the hollow barrel bead, really in 3 styles. We've got the empty barrel with nothing on it. We've got one with an inset gold disc, and then one with the discs on the outside edge. I kind of like them all, really. So in this tutorial, you learned how to make the hollow barrel bead, how to get more use out of your special papers by pairing it with regular paper of the same color, and how to create an inset in your bead so that you can use findings to dress them up a bit. Now, in a future video, I will make some projects with these beads, so be sure to subscribe to the channel so you can see what comes next. Happy rolling!